what's up everybody? Welcome to My Family's First Aid. Today we're going to be going over bleeding control and tourniquets. Bleeding control is huge, right? There's a lot of things, a lot of different tourniquets, and we cover about 6 different tourniquets to include improvised in our Stop the Bleed class and our bleeding control class. We've been going over a lot of infant stuff, CPR, life act, things of that nature. We're going to continue that series, those things with child and adult. But I want to kind of step over and move into tourniquets. We had an event recently where a lot of parents are telling us, you know, one of 3 things. Hey, we have a life hack, never used it, so we created a class to teach that. Also like, oh wow, cool man, we've got a CAT tourniquet and all of their kids are really small with really small arms. And I'm like, hey, the tourniquet's probably not gonna work. So we went ahead and showed them why. And so we cover child bleeding control, life-threatening bleeding. So like I said, with bleeding control, there is a lot, right? There's minor, major, life-threatening tourniquets, direct pressure. There's all kinds of different compression dressings. Today, we're just gonna dive into why am I holding this tape measure? We'll get there in a minute. But what is a tourniquet? So by definition, tourniquet is any type of cordage or banding or device that's used to constrict, apply circumferential, right, pressure, and to stop the flow of blood. That can be basic, a very basic, almost like rubber band that's used for a phlebotomist just to draw blood, right? It can also step all the way up to something such as this is what we typically think of with a tourniquet, right? Something that's used with life-threatening bleeding. Understand with the FDA, there's like 2,200 devices that are registered as a tourniquet. So when we talk about tourniquets here, it's going to be the tourniquets that are actually, well, tourniquets that are used to stop life-threatening bleeding. So today we're going over a CAT tourniquet. We'll go over the basics of how it's stored. CAT stands for Combat Application Tourniquet. Right now they're up to Generation 7, okay, so which means that's the newest revision of that tourniquet. The CAT tourniquet, this is blue. It is a training tourniquet. It is meant for the use on limbs to stop life-threatening bleeding, which is typically spraying, spurting, pouring, not stopping with direct pressure. Large pools of blood, right? Heavily soaked clothing, rags, things of that nature. Some organizations teach that flowing blood with direct pressure, and when you see more than half a soda can on the ground or on their clothing, that's life-threatening bleeding. But this is a CAT Gen7. It's blue because it's a trainer. Your real ones will come black, kind of packaged like this. And this is approved or recommended, it's recommended by the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care. So that means it's been reviewed by a lot of people who are very smart and very experienced in tourniquet use. They've reviewed a lot of data of tourniquet use in combat and in the civilian market. This has been found to meet the standard. So it is COTCCC or Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care recommended. CAT Gen7, made by North American Rescue. There are a ton of knockoffs of this device. You're gonna pay anywhere from about $29 to $32 to buy this. I recommend you go to North American Rescue to buy it or other reputable organizations. So there are a lot of knockoffs out there. So you might get 2 of these for 15 bucks on Amazon or whatever. You're wrong. Do not buy those. They fail, okay? The packaging will come like this. We'll do an entire video on fake tourniquets here coming up, but with the CAT Gen7, it's gonna come with this piece of paper that says Red Tip Technology. It's gonna come packaged like this. You need to unpack it, all right? You do not want, with bloody hands, to try to get this tourniquet out of the paper or the plastic to use on yourself in a life-threatening situation, so take the plastic off. I keep this one just to show people. So you wanna take it out. You wanna make sure that when you're staging it, right? When you stage your tourniquet, you want it to look like this, okay? Essentially what you're looking at here is you want that time tab open. You do not want your time tab closed, okay? And I'll go over that why. We'll go over the application here in just a minute. You'll wonder why you've got little Johnny sitting here. We're gonna show you some of the limitations of this tourniquet. Once again, why do I have this tape measure? Because the manufacturer of this tourniquet says that most of the tourniquets that are approved or recommended by the COTCCC will not work on very small limbs. And statistically, that's 5 inches in diameter, which is about this big, okay? This guy's arms are a little bit bigger. So we'll go back to the storage of it. So you take your plastic off of it. If for some reason the time tab is closed like this, you definitely want to carry it. So carry it with the time tab open. When you're walking around, you see police officers, look at their duty belt, you're going to see it carried like this, or it should be, okay? The next thing is that when this comes out of the package, it's going to come staged like this. So when you open these, right, it's going to come so that all the Velcro is stuck together and you basically have a continuous loop, okay? So some nomenclature and some basics on this is, like we were saying, this is your time tab. This clip here is your C-clip or windlass retention clip, right? It holds the windlass or the turning rod, right? This is your windlass or tensioning rod, okay? It stays in there. This is your back plate here. Inside you have a buckle here. This is the red tip, okay? And inside of this tourniquet, what runs continuously from your windlass or tensioning rod is this piece of ribbon, okay? That's called your tensioning ribbon that runs all the way down here to the tip, okay? That's what creates that circumferential or around type pressure to stop bleeding, okay? When you get this in the packaging, it's typically, like I said, going to come in a continuous loop when you open it, all right? These are one of the things we cover in our class, and that's important. I don't keep my tourniquets this way, okay? So staging this, you would have it set up like this, and that's how it's gonna come out, right? The way I stage it, so when you wanted to use it out of the package, it would look like this. The way I stage mine is I take the tip, open it up, right? So I go from the tip here, looking at the Velcro side, and I bring it down about 6 inches here. Just lightly tap that closed. Now I'm looking at the back of the tourniquet here, right? I can see the red tip right here by the buckle. I'm gonna fold this smooth, non-Velcro side over the buckle. So now I have smooth on Velcro, okay? Now, as you can see it again, all right, I have smooth and Velcro. Now I just fold this up, all right? Make sure my windlass is stuck in that tensioning, or the clip right there. Now this is how I carry it. Reason why I prefer this method, right, is because I can open this up, and typically with the tourniquets we teach, now I have a loop and a handle, all right? Whenever you apply these, you wanna make sure you're pulling towards yourself. So if I'm applying it to someone else, I wanna put it on and pull towards myself. If I'm applying it to myself, I wanna pull towards me, all right? You can put this on backwards and pull it away from you. It just makes it a little more difficult. That's one of the things you get, one of the reasons why you take hands-on training. So CAT Gen7, great tourniquet, recommended by the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care, very highly used, and it has been proven to save a lot of lives. So this is how I stage mine with that loop and handle setup. Make sure you're not buying a counterfeit. We'll go over a video on that. Now we'll go over how to use this tourniquet. Once again, buy it from North American Rescue or other reputable dealers. And our very next video will be on counterfeits. When I use this, I want to make sure that when I'm holding it, I'm going to use it on myself, right? I want to, once again, we can use it on limbs, arms, and legs, right? I want to hold it so I can see the C clip, okay? I'm going to open it up, and typically that loop presents itself right there. Now I'm going to just shoot my arm through, and I have an acronym. It's HOTS, high and tight, over clothing, but not over injury, not over the injury, not over joints, right? And not over objects. T is for to twist the rod until bleeding stops. Second T is tuck and twist the tail, and then the S is second tourniquet if needed. So I want to go high and tight, then I'm going to go high and tight on that first pull. Now I'm going to take this hand and readjust. I'm going to go high and tight again. When I'm pulling this tight, I'm trying to get as much tension or as much slack out of this as I can. I also want to make sure that the C clip and the windlass are right here. I want to make sure they're not behind me. So high and tight, second pull is high and tight. Now when I'm pulling this high and tight, I want to wrap this around and make sure I'm marrying up all that Velcro. Bring that up, it's right up to that clip, okay? So now I've got it high and tight, got it over my clothing, there's no objects, I'm not over the injury, and I'm not over a joint. So now what I'm gonna do is H-O-T, I'm gonna twist this rod either direction until bleeding stops or I can't twist anymore, right? So I gotta get pretty good tension there. So we'll say that one twist, right? It could be a couple of twists. It's going to be extremely painful in real life. So I twist the rod till the bleeding stops. Say the bleeding stopped there. I wanna grab my tail, I wanna twist and tuck it through the clip, and then pull my time tab over the top here. Put the time on here. Civilian world looking like 2 to 4 hours for application before there's any issues. In military, about 6 hours, okay? We don't ever want to remove this. Let the medical professionals remove it. Reason being, after that time period, we're gonna have lack of circulation in this arm, right? So those cells are starting to break down, right? There's dumping and breaking down and dumping the cellular debris into this part of my arm. If I open this, right, outside of a hospital or medical profession, I run the risk of all of that cellular debris and toxicity coming up to my heart and causing a heart attack and killing me. So typically in the hospital, they're gonna start an IV, they're gonna flow medications to counteract all that stuff, take blood. It's a whole nother conversation. But this is typically how this is how you should apply it. Now, the reason we want to tuck that tail in between here is that, say, hey, we twisted, bleeding stopped. Now I'm going to go ahead and just do my timestamp, right? Now this is open. Say, good, we stopped the bleeding. Now we need to move the patient. I need to move myself, and this gets caught on something, right? I just lost all tension, circumferential pressure, right? And now the tourniquet is open. So it is of absolute importance that when you apply this, you take that tail, you tuck and twist, right? High and tight over clothing, not over objects, not over a joint, not over the injury. We want to twist until the bleeding stops, so we can't twist anymore. We want to tuck the tail, T, tuck the tail, time tab, and then S is second. So say we twisted this as hard as we could and we're still bleeding, right? We want to go ahead and put a second tourniquet on just adjacent. If we have space, go above. Go above if you can. But if you want to as tight as you can, then we would just go next to it, right? You want to offset these clips and windlasses so you can get a little more working room. The next thing is with this, obviously, like I said, we don't remove it. If you don't have a second tourniquet, that's where we'll go into some compression dressings in the next few videos. But now I could either go to wound packing, I could go to an improvised tourniquet, I could go to a very a good commercial compression dressing and apply that over the injury. I could use that compression dressing and use somewhat of a makeshift windlass, makeshift tourniquet out of it. So, like I said, this is application on the arm for an adult or for a large arm that's over 5 inches in diameter. If we want to use this on our leg, okay, so we'll do leg application. Right, once again, the way I stage it, fold that tip over, smooth to Velcro, smooth to Velcro. Got my windlass tucked in. So say I want to use this on my leg. A lot of people say you should never use one of these on somebody's leg. Now I've used this on a lot of not a lot, but quite a few patients in real life, okay? We had a guy who amputated his arm and leg, didn't have to use a tourniquet, right? We had a guy who amputated partial amputation here and then of his fingers, needed a tourniquet. Blood-soaked rags everywhere, we went to a tourniquet, right? And then with him, we went direct 2 to 3 inches above. Standard application of this is supposed to be about 2 to 3 inches above. My problem in teaching non-professional rescuers is that we also don't hear a lot of people teaching, hey, we want to clear their clothes, like cut their shirt off, right? And as a medical professional, as a firefighter paramedic, we're going to cut that jacket off to see if we have any other injuries. So sometimes what's happened in the civilian world is they see this injury right here on the wrist or forearm, they apply this tourniquet 2 to 3 inches above the injury. What they don't realize is that the person's still bleeding because they didn't take that jacket off. What they didn't realize was a puncture wound up here that's bleeding. So in the civilian world of things, if you don't have much training, just go as high and tight as you can on the extremity. Now for use in the legs, a lot of people say, hey, there's 2 methods, right? We open it up. Don't use the lasso method, right? Over your leg like this, okay? A lot of people will say, and there is validity to that based on the injury, but there are plenty of videos on police activity which shows live officers who in live situations having applied tourniquets, and they're putting tourniquets on themselves just like that with the lasso method, okay? So 2 is 1, 1 is none. You need to know different ways to put it on. So there is the lasso method where you could sweep it up, right? Or as you open up your tourniquet, right? You throw it open, you may have so much damage to your leg, right? You may have exposed bone. You may have partially amputated and people have direct pressure. And for me to use the lasso method, right, I would have to have them remove pressure. Now we may bleed out even more. So that is a valid point where we may not be able to use the lasso method. Therefore, we open up tourniquet, undo that handle fold, slide it open, right? Typically at your leg, you have below your knee there, behind the knee, there's a small little void. I always say just stick the tip under there and just seesaw your tourniquet all the way up. Now we just put that red tip back through, draw it down as tight as we can, marry that Velcro around. So we're high and tight, not over any objects. So if you have a phone, you have a radio, you have a knife, right? We do not want that in the pocket. We're not over the injury, we're not over a joint, right? So HOT is we're gonna start to twist the tensioning rod or the windlass until bleeding stops or until we can't twist anymore, right? Once we've done that, there is no tail to tuck because we used up all of that tail right here. So now I want to go to time tab. Put that time on, transport the patient. Now, if I need to, I twisted that tensioning rod all the way and it's still bleeding, okay? We can apply a second tourniquet. In theory, we should go above, but if you went as high as you can, then just go next to it. If you don't have a second tourniquet, that's where we're gonna go into using compression dressing, wound packing, improvised tourniquet, things of that nature, which we'll go over in some new videos, some other videos. Now, why do we have little Johnny sitting here? Is that the way I like to teach tourniquets is that sometimes we have people who have limbs, they may be very sick, very young, very old, but their limbs are under 5 inches in diameter, okay? 5 inches in diameter means as we measure around their arm. So this tube here, which we practice with in our Stop the Bleed and bleeding control classes, is directly at 5 inches in diameter, okay? So as I bring this around, you can see it's married up right there to that 5 inches. This is typically about technically the smallest limb that your main commercial tourniquets will work on. And it's pretty close at that, all right? And the reason why is if we apply this, right? The way this CAT Gen7 tourniquet works, and the other tourniquet we'll go over another day is a soft SOF. It has a little more play in this, so it's actually a little bit, the backing plate isn't as big, so it works a little better. But as we're doing this, remember, the way this tourniquet works is I need Velcro on Velcro right there, right? In order for me to have the ability to twist this rod, pulling on this tensioning strap, tensioning ribbon, to pull circumferential pressure around. What happens with this, also when you apply it, you wanna make sure you cannot get fingers here. We don't want this gap. That's why it's super important we go high and tight. We readjust and go super tight to use up all that slack. Well, if I'm gonna use up all this slack on a 5-inch diameter arm, you can see there's literally no Velcro left for me to attach it to. I'm gonna go into the C-clip, but there is still a gap right here, okay? And it's already pulling off. So at 5 inches, I've basically taken the buckle and run it all the way to the clip, and there is still a gap there, okay? So there's no way for me to lock this down, okay? Now in theory, I guess in worst case scenario, you could run this strap through here, you could start to get crazy with it and try to tension it down here, but then the reality too is I've already used up all of that tensioning ribbon. There's nothing left, okay? So that's where hands-on training comes in play, right? Now, I don't teach tourniquets like this to use in very small, very young, very old, very small limbs, because really the go-to with bleeding control, life-threatening bleeding on children, which I've had to use plenty of times, and dog maulings, kids putting their hands through plate glass windows, traumatic car accidents, things of that nature, it's always direct pressure. But there's one key element, and that is that we have more than enough hands on scene to put direct pressure on those limbs. Where I go to in my class is, what if there's an existential threat, right? A dog, we have 3 or 4 kids down that this tourniquet won't work on. The dog is still in the vicinity, you're by yourself, and you don't have enough hands to put direct pressure on those bleeds. Very, very rare, worst case scenario, but it happens. So these tourniquets aren't actually recommended because the go-to for very young, very sick, very small limbs that these won't work on is simply direct pressure. And it really doesn't take much direct pressure to stop that bleeding. Once again, I've used direct pressure on plenty of life-threatening bleeds on children in real life. So with kids, like I said, we go to direct pressure. His arm right here is a little bit over 5 inches. There is just enough Velcro. We basically, on the little baby mannequin there, we get down to about, well, I'll just show you. So you can just hold him right here, right? As we apply this, you can see on his arm, as we pull this, you can see that there's actually some Velcro on Velcro. So on this baby here, we're lucky that might work because there's just enough Velcro between the buckle and the C-clip where I can start to twist this windlass, much like this, Now, obviously I can't tell if he's bleeding, and I need to be aware as I'm pulling this and it's pulling that tensioning ribbon, I may undo that. So it's imperative I maybe keep a thumb right here to help that pressure, that circumferential pressure stay, right? Twist and tuck the tail and time tab. But we still run the risk of this popping off even though it's tucked in because there's so little Velcro to Velcro right here, all right? Once again, this tourniquet is not made for a little baby like this. Worst case scenario, is a real world scenario where a father did have to use a tourniquet like this and it saved the baby's life, okay? So if we're able to, all we need is direct pressure. Even just with a thumb, with some bandaging, and we'll go over that in another video, and compression dressings. So once again, important to get a lot of training, work those different scenarios and situations. This is a CAT Gen7. There are fakes out there on the market. Don't buy a fake. Go to North American Rescue, right? Just brief, we'll make another video on it, but basically with a CAT Gen7, a real CAT is you're gonna have the letter CAT, you're gonna have this knurling or this ribbing here. It's gonna say CAT on the back here. This says avert, it is a different tourniquet right here. No, this is not the avert one, this is, so it's gonna say CAT right here, it's gonna have G7 for the G7. You're gonna look at the heat welding here, and on the back here, which we'll go into the video, but you're gonna have that red tip on here also. A lot of the knockoffs, theirs are smooth and they're very thin. They're a lot thinner than this. The clip is thinner and the backing plate is actually really flimsy. So in my classes, we'll look at the backing plate on this versus the training tourniquet versus a real CAT tourniquet, right? And we'll go ahead and look at some of the knockoffs and we'll look at the heat. I think it's a heat welding or stipling here that they use, and you can see on some of those tourniquets that the wording is different. The most important thing is instead of trying to figure out if it's fake or not, just buy from North American Rescue or a reputable dealer, okay? That's showing you and teaching these. Another thing is there's a lot of great training out there, stopthebleed.org. They're gonna give you free training typically. Instructors like I or other instructors who have businesses can advertise on there through there. As with anything, a lot of people can learn a skill and teach that skill, but not many people have actually, well, not many, I shouldn't say not many, but the best instruction you're gonna get is from somebody who's learned the skill, but somebody who's actually applied it in real life. So if you're going to take bleeding control training, try to find somebody who has actually used a tourniquet in real life. Try to find somebody who has actually applied direct pressure to the very young, very small, very old, and applied bleeding control in real life. So CAT Gen7, bleeding control, doesn't typically work on limbs under 5 inches in diameter. What do we do for this? We're just gonna apply direct pressure and hold that for about 3 minutes, sometimes max 10 until that bleeding stops. If we have more bleeds than hands, that's a conversation for another day. Have a good day, you guys.